Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Darsh Shah.
And I'm Dr. Altamash Raja.
And welcome to Medicine Redefined,
a podcast where we will explore the often overlooked but necessary components of health, what we consider to be the fundamentals.
We will investigate topics and practices that can give you and your patients the best chance to optimize a healthy lifestyle. It's time to move the needle forward and put the health back in healthcare.
Before we get into the show, here's a quick message from MedEvolve, a company that empowers physician practices to work smarter with data-driven services. Are you tired of dealing with headaches like finding and retaining quality billing staff, high turnover, and limited resources? Many practices are opting to outsource all or part of their billing processes to help relieve the burden on internal staff, free up resources, and reduce overhead costs. For those who wish to keep billing in-house, it's critical to have solutions that provide automation and give you the ability to monitor staff productivity and effectiveness, especially for remote employees. MedEvolve can help you leverage data and AI solutions that bring answers to the forefront and take the guesswork out of revenue cycle management. Let them show you how. To have this great company help you work smarter, reduce your cost to collect, and get paid on time, find them at drpodcastnetwork.com/MedEvolve. The link is also in the description of this show. Our discussion with Dr. Shawn Arent last week was such an informative and knowledge-packed episode. If you had a chance to tune in, it was pretty evident that Darsh and I had such a fun time nerding out, and we learned so much from Dr. Arent. In this episode, we discussed some of the key takeaways from our discussion with him and things that you might be able to learn as well. Without further delay, enjoy this recap episode.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Lessons Learned. This time we will be chatting about our episode with Dr. Shawn Arent. Man, Altamash, this episode was long, right? It was an hour 50, but full of dense information. Like, this is an episode where people might have to go back and just listen to or save and come back to it in the future, because there's just so much gold in this episode that I learned and that I just loved, because it opened up my mind and changed my perspective about a lot of different things.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. Actually, in fact, I probably expected it, to be honest with you, man. Just because, Dr. Arent he's just one of those people, when we talk about looking at the literature, looking at the data, most of the stuff when it comes into sports science, or I should say a lot of the stuff, he's the one producing all that, right? When it comes to nutrition. And it's so funny because when we asked him, hey, what's your current area? What are you researching? And he barely touched on nutrition. I think, and it's so funny because that's where we wanted to kind of start off our conversation with. And as I mentioned, I mean, he's all over the place. I spent my time at Rutgers with him, where he created the Center for Health and Human Performance, and has a history of playing Division I athletics. So he's definitely walked the walk, as you will. So he has experience from his own personal background as an athlete, but now as a sports scientist, exercise physiologist, continuing to see athletes at a high performance level, but also individual quote unquote the lay population. So it was fun, and very informative for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing we kind of touched on with him was nutrient timing, and, talking about pre-workout, post-workout, protein, carbs. When do we eat? When is the best time to optimize our bodies to, put it in this anabolic state? And, frequently in the last 10, 20 years, a lot of people mention, especially bodybuilders, people who, weightlift, about the anabolic window, about how we only have 30 minutes after a weightlifting session to chug that protein shake just so we can start building that muscle. And so we kind of asked him, hey, is this true? What do you think about it? And he's done extensive research, and he likes to talk about the garage door rather than an anabolic window, and really say that, the feeding period is actually much longer than we think. And too often we're too hyper-focused on nutrient timing. And what I love, he started talking about the layers of the cake. That's what I loved. And he said, nutrient timing is more of the icing. And before that, right, if you need to build the foundations of the cake. And that just comes down to quality and quantity of the protein or of the food.
Yeah, no, I love that. And again, we kind of took a backwards approach to the whole nutrition thing, honestly, because typically when somebody comes to me and, whether it's a family member, patient, client, whatever it might be, we start with quality. And I think any good coach, nutritionist, dietitian that you'll talk to, that's where they want to start, right? That's your low hanging fruit. No pun intended there.
Hmm.
But because that's what most people are missing the boat on. So,
Yeah.
but we wanted to take the timing approach because it's the most popular question you get. People are concerned about that last 10-20% where they should be focusing on the big 80%. Nevertheless, it was an exciting conversation. And yeah, I think that recently he actually published the same paper. I think they actually had a very similar title of the paper talking about the garage door
Hmm.
opportunity. So I agree with you. It was good to know that this opportunity, the feeding garage door, is much longer. But essentially, that's what a lot of other experts, I mean, that's what the consensus is, right? Then
Hmm.
that your peri-workout window is going to be, your body's going to be primed to absorb all these nutrients. And we got into the science of it a little bit nitty gritty, particularly talking about the upregulation of GLUT4. And, without diving back into it, if you want to go listen, I highly recommend that you do. But basically, exercise makes your body much more insulin sensitive, right? And it makes your muscles more glucose sensitive, if you will. And the only thing that does that for these receptors is insulin. So they're insulin dependent, and they allow all the sugar to be pulled into your muscle. But so does exercise. This is why exercise is so great for diabetes, as a
Hmm.
lifestyle management. So that was good to learn about that, just at least the biochemistry behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I've really been getting into biohacking lately. And so it's the new hot topic. Everyone's blowing up on Instagram about biohacking. But what I've come to realize just talking to Dr. Arndt is how much, and looking into my own life, how much I'm a little too focused in on the things that might not really matter as much, and kind of taking a overall big picture approach, right? Looking at timing doesn't necessarily have to be just the workout. It's from the moment you wake up to the moment you sleep, and even through sleep. So he really just opened my eyes to that, and just looking at my own life and saying, hey, what can I do better? And a lot of it actually doesn't even come to that 5-10% that could, like the cherry on the top. So the
Yeah,
other thing,
it's definitely bigger than that.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's
So the other thing I loved that he talked about was calories in versus calories out, right? Huge polarizing topic on Instagram, at least, or wherever you kind of get this nutrition information from. And, the way I used to approach it with people is, calories in, calories out definitely matters. And of course, it's not going to be like a perfect science, right? A lot of people are stuck on, no, what you put in your mouth. And if it exceeds your basal metabolic rate, you're going to gain weight. Or if you have less than what your basal metabolic rate and what you're supposed to do have in, you're going to lose weight. But can you kind of just explain why it's not that easy?
yeah, no, I mean, so I don't know why this is such a debate. I mean, I think that part of this has to do with the insulin model that we talk about, and I think there's definitely some merit to that. I mean, I don't know who the first person was to talk about it, but I think that with the fasting approach, and Jason Fung, who's a
Mhm.
brilliant nephrologist, I think that his book, The Obesity Code, I highly recommend that to check that out. He really dives into how fasting is a great management strategy for diabetes, but for a lot of other ailments as well. I think that's like anything else. Here we come back to the pendulum again, right? We
Mhm.
people tend to take it to the extreme, and then we forget just simple laws of thermodynamics, that it does matter at the end of the day. If your intake, and to his point, the absorption, the true
Absorption.
absorption
Yeah.
rather than just the consumption, that is the most critical point. If that outweighs, I mean, it's like a seesaw, right? If
Mhm.
one side, if your intake or absorption, I should say, is heavier, then you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, the pounds off the scale or the body fat percentage is not going to go. And by the same token, if you're trying to put weight on, you need to be quote unquote anabolic. You need to be consuming more than you're actually burning.
Mhm.
It is very simple. I think that most of the people, unfortunately, who are arguing about these topics have little knowledge about it. I wouldn't say all of them, but I don't know why things have to be mutually exclusive. You know what I mean?
Right.
Both can be true. Both can be absolutely true. I think that AC Zinkowski recently posted something
Yeah, I
to
was just
that
about to talk
respect.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it. Go for it.
She said calories in, calories out is basically saying that, we're talking about weight. And then calories matter is of course also true. And that's talking about health. And that health can definitely affect the weight, right? So all these variables matter, but we also have to learn how to separate them at the same time. So it's this beautifully simple, but yet it can be complex if we choose to make it complex. But at least for the listeners out there, I think Dr. Shawn Arent does a beautiful job, like you said, talking about absorption and how the gut can really play a role in this whole calories in, calories out model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another point that we had kind of, before we even got into the intermittent fasting topic, just because we were learning so much, we touched on all these different diets and what tends to work. And again, going back about why nutrition tends to be so confusing, I think for the average population who aren't as informed as maybe you and I are, or maybe even somebody like Dr. Arent, who aren't just diving deep into the literature on a daily basis, you get most of your information from websites or other people that it tends to work for. And then again, it goes to that approach for individualization. If it worked for you, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for me. But I kind of loved his new diet that he talked about, if it fits your lifestyle.
Right.
And as I've learned more and more, again, I don't know why people find it so frustrating. As long as you have the similar principles, and when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, most of these diets you'll find have a lot of common denominators, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's what you tend to focus on. If you tend to focus on those the foundations of what it is, then again, the icing on the cake, as we said before, the last 10, 20, 30%, the differences between, they don't matter as much. Then you need to kind of figure out what tends to work for you. And so, yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it is, and I think that just to kind of summarize what his if it fits your lifestyle is, basically, again, going back to the foundation: eat mostly whole foods, right? Don't dine away your time with people. Eat things in moderation. Start with protein and fill in around depending on your energetic demands. Like, so if you're a high intensity athlete, like if you're a professional soccer player, which was what we consider a power aerobic sport, where I think at one point he referenced a study where some work that some athletes had 95 to 97% of glycogen depleted. Well, then you better be consuming lots of carbohydrates if you want to have optimal performance. But if you're a relatively sedentary individual, or again, you and I are now residents and we're working a lot of time, so we're not training as hard as we did, we don't need to consume as much carbohydrates, right?
Right.
So that's kind of what you need to figure out for yourself. Like, does your absorption or intake in that regard match your energetic demands?
Absolutely. I think what people need to realize, again, a lot of these people are going to Instagram, finding plant-based, finding a carnivore diet, finding paleo, finding keto, whatever it may be. And a lot of the information out there is focusing on that, 5%, 10% of, the zinc and the magnesium. And it's like, okay. Like, let's back off a little bit and talk about the quality and quantity. And like you said, like, everyone's looking for this one quick fix, and a lot of people are just looking for the one thing that will help them, right? Just the one diet, rather than taking the strengths of all these different diets and combining them. And when you look at the research, I think a lot of these diets, the reason they work is because people previously were on the SAD diet, right? The standard American diet. So like, any diet is going to be better than that. And usually when somebody
100%.
starts a new diet, they're going to be a lot more hyper aware of the quality of food that they're buying. They're going to be more aware if they're hitting those 10,000 steps. Their whole lifestyle changes usually, right? And now it's about consistency, right? I think you put up a great tweet today by Eric Cressy about showing up. It's about showing up every single day. That's what's going to be the best thing. And as Dr. Arent says, the best diet is one that you'll do, and the best workout is one that you'll do. And again, if it fits your lifestyle, I might have to put that in my Instagram bio, IIFYL with a little plant, just so I can let people know that that is how I identify myself with the diet. So,
yeah. And I mean, I think we just make it more complicated. It's just going back to simple isn't sexy, and I think like Dave talked, he's making foam rolling sexy again. I think we're gonna make simple sexy again. Hopefully, if people want to take away one tagline, then maybe those are the two. If it fits your lifestyle, and make simple sexy again.
Simple sexy, I like it.
Anything else on that front before we switch over to like time restricted eating and intermittent fasting?
No, let's go into it. Let's go into IF and PRE.
Yeah. So the IF, I mean, again, that's interesting for me. So what I'll tell you is, again, being kind of getting my start in the fitness industry, this was like many other fad diets. I think most of the things, diets, I should say, or a lot of nutritional protocols kind of start in the realm of bodybuilding fitness, because people are trying to figure out what the best thing is for physique or for aesthetic purposes, right? For physique modification, things of that nature. And so I think most of the research, or at least the most robust research that's done in this regard, is looking at a lot of the weight loss type stuff. So And that's why that has so many confounding variables. To me, for that purpose, I don't care as much. I kind of shared my story about, trying to cut body fat percentage when I was trying to get as lean as possible. Don't ask me why. I wasn't as stressed out in medical school yet. So those are the things I could do. That was less interesting to me. The thing that's really piqued my interest as of late is, again, the idea of longevity, right? When we're looking about being centenarian, like your great grandmother, I believe, your paternal great
Yeah.
grandma,
My grandma. Yeah.
grandma, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to get there, right? And so that's what was interesting to me, and so it was good to kind of pick his brain in that regard. But I think that for most people, one of the reasons they do tend to be attracted to this is because physiologically and psychologically it's a bit easier. It's kind of just easier to skip the meal rather than think about that's another decision that you have to make, how to make healthy versus unhealthy, or how to identify healthy versus unhealthy foods. So I get it from that perspective.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, the one that I'm more interested in, and I need to continue looking at the literature, is again where the stress resistance and glucose regulation type stuff comes in. And this is where Jason Fung's book is good. I gotta go. It's been over a year and a half that I read it, so I wish I had taken more notes. But that's kind of where I want to dive into. But what are your preliminary thoughts before we talk a little bit about the metabolic flexibility and those types of things?
Yeah, no, for me, I think, IF, I think, has its advantages. I don't think it's for everyone. I really don't. I think people try to force it at times, especially when they're trying to lose weight. And sometimes people need to realize that you want to overshoot your calories at times, maybe, just if you're working out heavy and stuff, you need those calories. So I think it's a great way to phase things in and out. I was intermittent fasting for about 2 years. I just found myself super bloated. The great thing about it, and why I skipped breakfast was the mental clarity. I was no longer bogged down after these meals, not really having a food coma. But yeah, Jason Fung's work is where actually I kind of first got introduced to it. He has a great interview with Mike Mutzel, Metabolic Mike, or he also has a podcast, shout out to him, High Intensity Health. But I do need to read Obesity Code, and hopefully soon we'll get Dr. Fung on our podcast.
That'd
be awesome.
That would be awesome. The other one actually I would recommend for you, man, is maybe as a prerequisite or afterwards would be the Circadian Code. I kind of talked about Sachin Panda's work. It's a shorter read. There are some similarities when we're talking about nutrition and fasting in that, but he does have an interesting thought about just how every single organ in the body has its own circadian rhythm. So I would highly recommend that.
I'm gonna have to check it out.
Yeah, but what I did like that Dr. Arent referenced that, hey, metabolic switching, not so much, but metabolic flexibility is pretty important. I do like that concept. I do think that is an important concept that we have to kind of pay attention to, because in today's day and age, maybe 500 years ago, when you had to kind of find whatever and then eat any kind of food, whether it was berries or versus just eating a deer, right, that you killed with your own hands. Today you can find the same foods on a daily basis, right? We're most folks, I don't want to be insensitive and say that all folks, but most folks can't afford a lot of the things, and they can just be on the same exact diet, the same components of the SAD diet, if you will. But essentially what the term, for those who don't know, metabolic flexibility, basically what's talking about is, the preferential shift of your body from the use of glucose as a fuel source, sugar, to the use of fatty acids and ketone bodies, right? So it's basically your body's ability to toggle back and forth between these two metabolic states, and that's going to be an indicator of metabolic flexibility. Peter Attia from The Drive, we're both huge fans of him. He did give this a counterpoint to this. Actually, recently, I want to say in 2019, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is what our parent journal in medicine, they published an extremely popular article of the effects of intermittent fasting on health. I would recommend check that out if you haven't read it yet. And it's like a very comprehensive overview of it. But in that paper, the authors kind of talked about how at 24 hours of fasting, your plasma ketones measure, up to at max 0.5 millimoles, right? But when you look at the literature and at what state of ketosis you will benefit in terms of the cognitive health and a lot of the benefits you get from ketosis, it's 1 millimole and beyond, right? Okay. So again, this goes back to, what are you doing it for? Right. So if you're fasting for 12 hours or 14 hours and 18 hours, I mean, I think that you still have benefit. Again, every individual, like I might achieve ketosis much faster, whereas you might achieve it lower, or later on, or vice versa. So I think that's an important thing to understand. I think this is one of the reasons he's not a huge fan of the time restricted eating as being
Mhm.
called intermittent fasting. And the same point that Dr. Arndt was making is, okay, when you have intermittent fasting, which protocol you're doing? You kind of need to identify why you're doing it, what it is that you're actually even talking about, and then how you're going to implement that in practice for your goals.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love how he said it's you got to figure out your why and essentially what are you doing it for, right? You have to have a goal. You can't just nilly-willy kind of, hey, I'm just going to fast for 16 hours. Or sure, you can, but in the end, are you just kind of wasting that fast or, what's the point behind it? And that's where I was, honestly, like a couple years ago. And yeah, I've kind of heard the research, like, in order to achieve autophagy, it has to be at least like 48 hours, 48 to 72 hours for like full benefit. And so that's where I kind of am now in my personal journey with intermittent fasting is I'll just do like a 48 hour once a month. Actually, I'll do one tomorrow and the next day because I'll have my board exams level 3. So figured why not just do it when I'm going to be doing 400 questions a day anyways. But yeah, for me, it's like, it goes back to that hunger drive, that animalistic tendency that we might have, getting in tune with yourself. I've noticed that my meditations are a lot more transcendental when I fast. So for me, I've definitely shifted the focus from more of a lose weight, calorie standpoint to more of a spiritual one with fasting.
That's interesting. Now, are you drinking black coffee at all? No, you don't drink coffee.
I rarely do. Sometimes I will just to suppress the appetite.
Yeah.
I'll do it around like 12 p.m. on one day, or I do a lot of seltzer water,
Okay.
which will help with the carbonation. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. That's actually a good point. So, so just to give you a background, interestingly, I think that for me, 20 hours is about the max. And I'll tell you why. My extremities typically run so cold.
Well, yeah.
And like my wife, I mean, Amelia will tell me, I don't know what is wrong with you, but so the longer I go on my fast, like I am freezing.
Mhm.
And I mean, I suspect some of it has to do with like my heart rate. I mean, typically my heart rate's in the low 40s or around 40. That's kind of where I hang. And maybe that has to do something with my circulation. But yeah, if I go beyond 20 hours, man, it's intolerable
Really?
how cold my hands get. Yeah. So that's interesting. My other thing is like, again, trying to shift it to have more like, if I'm doing the TRE, it's hard for me to sleep if I stop eating at 4 p.m. I don't know. Do you ever find that's an issue for you or no?
Yeah, I find it very tough to sleep, especially when I'm hungry. And I think, when I look back at why, it just comes down to back in the day when we're hunter gatherers, we would stay awake just to get that food.
Right.
So I guess there has to be some sort of connection with, sleep drive
Yeah.
and fasting. And just for the listeners out there, IF versus TRE, what are we kind of meaning by this? TRE, time restricted eating, is probably what most people mean by intermittent fasting. It's how many hours are you not eating in a day, right? Whereas intermittent fasting is intermittently doing periods of fasting. So maybe like once a week, you're doing, 2 days of not eating, or quarterly, you're going to do a 7-day fast. That's essentially intermittently, that's intermittent fasting versus what we mean by TRE is more of a daily kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so my old boss, Jason Ferrugia, that I work for over the Renegade, he created the Renegade diet. I think this again back was 2012. It's a quick short read. But the idea essentially was he talked a lot about the benefits from the fitness side of intermittent fasting. But that's when I started doing it as well. It was a lot about just skipping breakfast and kind of, again, in the morning, most people are going to work. It's easy. You get that mental clarity benefit. It is harder to sleep. You're more focused, less probably dependent on caffeine. So maybe that's one of the reasons why I was doing it, and it's much harder for me to sleep. And his recommendations used to be that you eat a heavier carb meal because typically people will get sleepy after a carb meal
Mhm.
at nighttime. But again, it's very, very has to be individualized, because if you're going
Yeah.
to eat a heavier carb meal, we just talked about how you're going to be much more glucose sensitive or insulin sensitive post exercise, and that's why. But as we're getting more information about insulin sensitivity, tends to be better in the morning.
Mhm.
So maybe early eating might be better. But again, that type of defense. So I'll give you an example. One of my attendings, who's awesome, would recommend that people start doing TRE and cut their evening meals further back.
Okay.
But at the same time, I typically train in the evenings. Or well,
Hmm.
not anymore. Now I'm trying to train in the mornings, but I was, when I have to be at work at 6, 7 o'clock, I'm not training at 4:30 in the morning. I'm not doing
Yeah.
that. I'm sorry. I'm not The Rock.
No.
Um, so I would typically train in the evenings. And if I'm going to train in the evenings, I want to have my carbohydrates around that. I think that ultimately makes more sense than, despite that, if you are a little bit more insulin, quote unquote, resistant, not necessarily. Also,
Sure.
then there's a social component of it, right? Like I think
Hmm.
Ben Greenfield talks about this when he's not fasting at night, and he wants to have dinner with his kids and his family, right? Most people tend to have dinner on the family table. So that's another. So I mean, you really have to kind of do the pros and cons for you. I
Right.
do want to quickly talk about when we're talking about the evidence and looking at the literature. There was a meta-analysis published in the International Journal of Obesity in 2019, and essentially they had three separate things. They looked at continuous energy restriction versus intermittent energy restriction, which is kind of like IF, and then they had intense energy restriction. And basically, the difference between intermittent and intense was that you, in the intense one, you never made it back to baseline, right? So overall, you were in a deficit. And essentially, what they found in the results were that intermittent energy restriction might produce a larger loss of lean mass compared to
Hmm.
continuous energy restriction. And again, the purpose of the study was to look at just the body composition, right? Albeit
Right. Yeah.
it was small, and it's clinically not even significant. However, previously, I think a few months before, there was a systematic review that talked about how these effects could be mitigated by performing resistance training and consuming enough dietary protein. Now, Dr. Arndt did talk about that, right? Protein tends to be the foundation.
Hmm.
And if you ever talk to a bodybuilder, if you ever have been around bodybuilder, that's where they start. When they, again, we're not diving into macronutrients today, but when they try
Hmm.
to figure out what macronutrients are going to fit their, their daily energy intake and expenditure, you always start with protein. This is how much protein I'm going to do, and then you fill fats and carbs around that. So I think that that's also important to understand. Is, hey, ultimately, and I think we've talked about how protein is probably the most satiating one, right? And
Hmm.
that's going to keep
Right.
it full longer as well. So that's why it's important.
Yeah.
Um, what were your thoughts about just him talking about, good foods and bad foods? I think that's an important point to touch on really quickly.
Yeah, you're talking about in terms of like clean eating, like he says, like quote clean
Cheating,
eating, not really
quote
like
unquote
cheating
cheating.
and stuff. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I want to first say like a lot of this comes down to self experimentation, right? For people listening to these things, people doing their research, people trying to figure out what works best for them. You got to experiment. Like you're not going to know until you try it. Try a 5-2 intermittent fasting. Try a 24. Try keto. Try vegan. You just got to get into these things, see what works for you. What are the best things you can get out of that. And then, yeah, don't be so hard on yourself. I was looking at Dr. Chatterjee, Ramgun Chatterjee. He's a general practitioner in the UK. Talks about obesity and weight loss and eating, and he just says we have to have self-compassion. Right? It starts with that. In order for you to transform your life in a positive way, you have to be compassionate towards yourself. So when you do have a cheat meal, or when you have that donut that you really wanted, not to feel guilty, but to just enjoy that pleasure of life for what it is, And the way I look at it too, from a very philosophical standpoint, is sure I can optimize all I want every single day. I'm gonna die one day, Like I also want to enjoy. I also want my cheese, which I try to cut back on dairy, personally, but there are times where I love Gouda, and I'm gonna go all in. So I love that point of that he made about just having compassion towards ourselves in terms of food, with good food and bad food and stuff.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, my regret is yesterday I went grocery shopping and love Wegmans. I don't know if I told you my new
Yeah.
favorite store,
Oh yeah.
but so and I posted a picture on social of my cart, which was primarily
Mhm.
vegetables. In fact,
Saw that.
it's like other than the protein that I got 90%. What I didn't post, and I wish I had, is the pizza that I got.
Mhm.
Uh, and I felt guilty afterwards because I didn't post it because I came home and ate it so fast. Because oh man, their pizza is amazing, but I wish I had done that. And then I was like, oh man, this is exactly what he was talking about. Is I used to be one of those people. That doctor, we were like, oh, that's bad food. That's, you're going to say it's like 100% all in or not all in. And especially when, people, maybe they'll mess up. I mean, I could have, again, it was just 2 slices of pizza. It wasn't like you said, oh, it's 2 slices. Let me go to another pie after that and an ice cream after that, because the day is all ruined. This is such an important point for people to understand that, like, again, if you're having 3 meals a day, let's say you're not doing IF or TRE, and you're having 3 meals a day, or maybe even 4 meals a day, whatever it is, 21 meals, if 1 or 2 are bad, like, you're still going to be fine. Again, extrapolate that out to a year, 2 years. Again, going back to consistency, you got to enjoy it and you got to be kind to yourself. So I promise I will try to post the next pizza pic that I get, because
Full
it is
disclosure,
very, very
I had a whole box of Domino's yesterday, man. I had a guys' night with some residents, and
I'm really not a fan. I gotta say,
no,
I'm really not a fan.
I think it was just like we needed some quick fix,
Yeah,
started. I
I'm
got
with
a
you.
pineapple jalapeno, solid
Yeah.
toppings.
Okay. See, I'm not. Man, you're one of the. I
Ooh,
can't do
I'm
pineapple
gonna
on
have
my
to convince
pizza.
you. We'll get there
Let's
by
see.
the end of
Eat and spicy. Sweet.
yeah.
All right. So a quick point, that when you asked him what performance is, this was music to my ears. Do you remember what he said about performance?
He said something. It's about function, right? It's about the
Exactly.
daily function that you can do.
He's an honorary physiatrist, man. That's what he
Yeah,
is.
right. We recruited him onto the club. Yeah, no, a great point. Especially what we deal with, right, as physiatrists. Seeing our patients, just trying to get optimally back to the way they were living, right? So somebody with an amputation, or somebody, with nerve damage, can't really walk anymore, and they gotta slowly get back to how they were. That's a struggle, and that's going to be performance. Them going to the gym, working, what they're going to eat is going to matter. All these things, it's all performance driven.
100%. I mean, again, I love that he made that statement, because that's what we're all about. I mean, as cliche as some people might say it sounds, it's about quality of life. It's about getting up, when you're 80, 90, 100, and still being able to play with your kids. Oh, that reminds me, I got to check out that ad that he told us about with the
The German,
yeah. So I'm going to Google that. But what was funny to me is, again, he said he started training when he was like 11 years old. I mean, for me, it was around the same time. I started working out when I was about 12. So that I'm a little over 19 years now lifting. And yeah, just training for the sake of training gets to be hard. And so I really resonated with that ad thing that he talked about, is because I like to go hard. Like, I like to go very, very hard. And then people are like, oh, what are you training for? And so I'm just training for life, and they just look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, what?
I know exactly what you're talking
about. But that's what it is. And it's funny that he mentioned with his own life, he starts to doing periodization, is because he still likes to surf, and he still likes to ski and do all those things. So when winter is coming around the corner, he'll start adjusting his training accordingly to get prepared. And I do that. I mean, I love playing flag football, and so as April starts rolling around, when I'm going to play spring ball, 2-3 months before that, I got to start training. Not only is that smart, is it fun, but it's also smart because it's going to prevent injuries from happening. So It's like, if I don't do explosive stuff, or I don't get out there, do some sprints, and then all of a sudden I go and try to play football, that's nothing good's going to come out of that, right? And I like my Achilles, both of them, and I'm trying to keep those. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, whatever it is, whether it's being able to pick your kids up, or go up a mountain with them, because they love hiking, or again, being able to go on a run, performance is just function for your every single day life. So hopefully people can take something away from that.
Yeah, it's what Peter Attia kind of says, right? We got to prep for the centenarian Olympics. When we're all 100. So it's kind of goes along that. Are you playing the long game, or are you playing the short game? And that's important. You got to know what you're playing. You got to know what you're playing. So,
and it's hard. I wish that wisdom came earlier for me in my life, when I was maybe 18, 19, 20, even 23, 24, rather than at the age of 29, 30, because I could have saved a lot of chronic stuff from happening. And the hope is that maybe some of the pre-meds and medical students that are maybe earlier in their career can appreciate this, not only for themselves, but also for their patient. And they can kind of convey that. But speaking of injuries, what did you learn about nutritional interventions for injuries?
Yeah. I think it comes down to being more aware. I think, when you have an injury, and I think, again, for me, a lot of my life comes from perspective and philosophy. And it's when you are injured, or when you are in this down state, it's not looking at it in the way of saying, okay, like, I'm doomed. Like you said, I just had a pizza, my day's gone. No, it's, how do I get back from this? How do I optimally get back to my function? And so, yeah, I just think, being a little more hyper aware in terms of what's going in your body, how you're going to get back, doing it safely, following almost a protocol, and doing your own research in terms of seeing what works for you.
Yeah. Again, I think that more so than ever, kind of what I'm getting from you is, again, going back to the quality part. And we got to get somebody on here who can hopefully we can really dive into the quality. And I think we plan on doing that pretty soon. But to me, man, I'm going to send you this. It's like a 4-part series about Precision Nutrition. I've mentioned them a couple of times because I
Mhm.
respect them so much. They kind of have a whole nutritional, recovering from an injury. One of the cool things about them is they have these really nice infographics that are just, a picture speaks 1,000 words. But essentially, my thought process on injury recovery and nutrition around that is, you and I understand the body's healing response, but it can typically be broken down into a couple of phases, right? You have the first phase, the inflammation phase, right, which is necessary.
Right.
Acute inflammation is necessary. Chronic inflammation is what's bad. That's kind of what Dr.
Mhm.
Jyoti Patel talked about as well, right?
Yep.
That
Yep.
things are always simmering and things go on. And so being able to manage inflammation in the acute phase, allowing it to happen, but not icing 3 weeks after an injury. Like if you're doing that, then something is wrong.
Mhm.
Um, that reminds me, we're going to have to kind of talk about icing versus meat and all of those, the new protocols as well.
Yeah.
But in their precision nutrition, Dr. Arent specifically talked about that. He did mention omega-3s and leucine and I think he said L-glutamine as well, about how they can help recover a little bit better. But I think ultimately protein. I mean, if you're getting good proteins, you're going to get all your branched amino acids. You're going to get glutamine in there, omega-3 fatty acids. What's more important though is the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. Most people have heard omega-3 fatty acids in fish oil, and sometimes walnuts will have that. Although plant omega-3 fatty acids aren't converted to EPA and DHA. I don't want to dive too much into that, but
Yeah.
essentially, most of our SAD or American diet is high in omega-6, particularly with the vegetable oils. Again, Ben Greenfield hates these. I've been listening to so much of his stuff. But so the ratio is kind of really important. Curcumin, that's pretty well studied in literature in our world for osteoarthritis, knees type stuff. There's a myriad of other benefits for curcumin as well. But I think for pain related stuff and injury, bromelain, which you can find in pineapples. There's your pineapple that you got yesterday.
That's right.
Flavonoids, which you're going to find in teas, and garlic. Garlic is, again, going back to what Dr. Jyoti Patel said about South Asians loving that. So I think there's managing the inflammation is going to set you up right. And then after that, you have the proliferation phase where all these collagens are trying to being laid down when you have, like, let's say you have a tendon or a muscle injury, and you want to make sure they're not irregularly laid down. And that's where rehab is so critical. #PMNR. That's where therapy is going to be so important, and that like proliferation remodeling phase. And the one thing that he did harp on was making sure that your calories aren't completely dropped down, because your body is in this energy consumption phase in order for it to heal. The healing process does require a lot of energy. Now, one thing to point out though is, like, if you are an athlete, or if you're in competition, or not even athlete, let's just say a lot of people do CrossFit, right? CrossFit can be pretty taxing on the body. And let's say you're going to the box 4 to 5 times a week and you're training 4 to 5 good resistance training sessions. And then now, hopefully not, but you hurt yourself and now you're not training. You need more calories than your basically resting level if you were sedentary, but not as much as you were training before. So somewhere in the middle. And I think that this thing that actually we'll post it in our show notes so people can see from PN really talks about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, man. Before we close it out, we got to touch on the supplementation, because again, like I said, 2 to 3 times a week, somebody's hitting me up to ask me about supplementation.
For sure.
So, what did you take away from that? And then I'm actually curious if you're taking any supplements right now.
Yeah. So let me first start off with creatine, right? Because that's the one he's like, there's so much research. And I remember I started creatine about maybe like 6-7 years ago. And at first I was never a big supplement guy. I was like, I don't know what the research shows. Is this good for the body, the kidneys, right? Just creatinine that we always hear about. So people get that confused. So creatine for sure, right, is one of them that I'll take post-workout, I believe he said, more so because you're insulin sensitive and stuff. And so, it can shuttle straight to the muscle. So that's an easy one. Caffeine, right, in coffee. Great, for alertness, performance, just elevating your heart rate, getting you ready. So that's definitely one that, I'm not the biggest fan of. I'll rarely do coffee. I'll do a green tea, maybe, if anything. And then what else do I take? Let's see. So I take magnesium. I take so I am vegetarian, so I do plant-based protein, like a protein shake. And then I was taking ashwagandha for a little bit, just for like the stress response, especially with residency. And then I take B12. And I stopped taking a multivitamin. I actually heard Peter Attia talks about this. He doesn't think there's much utility for multivitamin as long as you're having a pretty complete, healthy diet, which, I think I agree with him
That's
on
the
that.
key phrase, though.
Exactly. Yeah, that is the key phase. You got to be having that quality key diet in there. That's all I take because, sometimes I'll take like a biotin or like a collagen or something. I scar pretty
Yeah.
easily. So I don't know if I have like
Yeah.
some deficiency in that, but
yeah, I gotta look into this more about collagen type stuff. I mean,
and
it's
vitamin
becoming
D.
very popular. Yeah. Oh, vitamin D. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's been more popular than ever nowadays. Yeah, the collagen stuff, I got to look into. I don't know too much about it, but yeah, again, creatine is, again, besides caffeine, the most widely studied one. And it's going to there's no almost, I shouldn't say no. Yeah, most people are going to respond well to creatine in terms of performance or hypertrophy, and you really have to kind of measure. It might not be noticeable effect. One of the main side effects is two main side effects is people get some GI distress, and then obviously some water retention. But guess what? Glycogen is mostly muscle, is mostly water. You're mostly water, so that didn't make sense. It's simply protein. I think that he did emphasize that as well, and one of the points that I wanted to make is he touched on, protein being, again, most physicians, and I think our colleagues, even myself to some degree, used to think that it's detrimental in patients with kidney disease. And he said how the preponderance of research is not panning out to show that. And, you don't necessarily want to be on a high protein diet, but at the same time, you don't need to be protein averse, right? In fact, that might be more detrimental because most of these individuals, not all, but most of these individuals might be elderly. They might be frail. They already might have significant muscle loss and atrophy. And if you put them on, a low protein diet, then that's going to only exacerbate the debility. And then what are we doing, right? So I think that often you and I, we see it in the hospital when they're on a renal diet or protein diet, and it's like cut the protein off to 60 grams a day, or if even 40, 30 grams a day. And it's like, what the hell? And for those who don't know, renal diet is typically low in potassium, which we're not suggesting that anybody put anybody on a high protein diet, but you'd be surprised, man. When I was trying to get super lean, I was consuming upwards of 250 grams of protein a day. It's hard to do. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. It's insane to do. And I was a healthy individual, and I'm not suggesting that anybody does that. But I think that I would caution our colleagues to say, okay, protein is toxic for the kidneys. I don't think that the literature is supporting that. So definitely be familiar with that. The one thing I do want to emphasize, the biggest thing I took away from a supplement conversation with him is that the FDA does actually.
Oh, yeah. 100%. That blew my mind. I had no idea.
Yeah, I am actually so guilty of telling people that, but I actually went to go look this up, and we're going to post exactly the FDA 101 page for supplements, but just a couple of points to point out that I took away, which were terrifying. And this is straight from their website. The federal law does not require dietary supplements to be proven safe to FDA satisfaction before they are marketed. Okay, great. Also, the federal law doesn't require the manufacturer or seller to prove to FDA satisfaction that the claim is accurate or truthful before it appears on the product. Okay, so it doesn't have to be safe, and it doesn't even have to be truthful. And in general, FDA's role basically with these supplements begins after it gets to the market. So all they're really checking for is the serious side effects that are reported by the company. And so that he had mentioned really the FTC, which is like the Federal Trade Commission kind of docs them. The FDA doesn't even do that. So, the dietary supplement manufacturers, they don't even need to get the agency's approval before producing or selling these. It's just like they have to let the FDA know courtesy, hey, we're doing this, kind of apply this. So gotcha. It's kind of terrifying. But you might wonder, okay, so what the hell do we do, right? People ask me about supplements. So I used to say, hey, they're not regulated. Now I know better. Now it's just quality control, right? So that's kind of what it is. I mean, I guess they're regulating, but are they really regulating? Regulating is a loosely say that here. So I think when I tell people to recommend this is why when I buy my protein creatine, like I'm paying double or triple what most people end up paying, is that you want to get products that have a CGMP label under FDA. And what that is, that they're certified with, good manufacturer practices. This is compliance by the FDA that a lot of the quality control issues will be taken care of. So the facilities that they're making the products, they'll be inspected periodically, and so at least that's something. Then the other one is the label that folks might want to look for is NSF, right, which is the National Sanitation Foundation. So anything that's NSF certified for sport or informed sport, those words are on the label. Again, that this is being held to a higher standard. And then lastly, just flip it over and look at friggin' ingredients, right?
Right.
Don't be buying stuff that says proprietary blend because you don't know what the hell that even means.
Exactly.
So
that's coloring, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's my last bit from today, man, or from his conversation. Yeah,
love it. Let me just add real quick. People ask me the same question. Labdoor.com is one that I love. So looking at these websites that do outsourcing, so they'll actually test the quality of different supplements. They'll rank them from like which is the best to worst, also price wise. So Labdoor.com is one of my go-tos. And then got this from Dr. Christian Gonzalez, who one day hopefully get on this podcast as well. He'll reach out to companies specifically and say, hey, can I get the certificate of analysis, just so he knows how much heavy metal is in here, what ingredients are they using. So he won't be afraid. He'll call up, and then if the company says, hey, we don't really give it out, it's a little fishy. So just be aware of those types of things.
Those are some great calls. We'll link those too so people can easily access that.
Cool.
Awesome, man. Well, this is definitely a little bit on the lengthier recap, but again, this was such a powerful episode. So hopefully people can get something, actionable from this and enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more, man. Sweet.
All right. Later.
Hey.
Well, that's a wrap on the show. But before we end, don't forget to reach out to MedEvolve. For those of us who know how hard it is to build and maintain a sustainable business, we understand that bringing the right help to achieve our goals is really important. Get in touch with them for data-driven analytics, workflow automation, and medical billing technology and services by going to www.drpodcastnetwork.com/MedEvolve and get going on the right path. As always, guys, remember everything in this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute the practice of medicine, and we are not providing medical advice. No physician-patient relationship is formed, and anything discussed in this podcast does not represent the views of our employers. If you find the content valuable, please be sure to subscribe and share with someone else who you think will also benefit from this podcast. Thank you so much for your time.